So we'd invite you to find a seat, grab some coffee, grab some tea. We're going to continue today in our Lenten series around this sort of related topics around forgiveness, reconciliation, and restorative justice. So the upcoming speakers are in the insert, the announcement, and I just kind of might remind us what we had last week if you weren't here. And the things that have sort of shaped our conversation. Next week, Peter is going to share with us some more next week. Yes.
Yes.
On, I know, restorative justice and the like, to help us go a little bit deeper. And the week after, on the 15th, we will be welcoming the Reverend Matt Ikahashi Potts, who is... I think maybe 2 years ago, I believe he published a book on forgiveness. And so he'll be with us from Harvard to speak, to preach, and to speak with us at the forum. And then we will finish up the Lenten series on the 29th. On the 22nd, there will be a State of the Church. On the 29th, Reverend Janelle and I will reflect a little bit more as we enter Holy Week. We're going to look at the week ahead and reflect on it in light of an understanding of God's justice. So we invite you to come and be a part of that. But today, I'm really glad, I'm really excited, I'm really happy to welcome Peter and Lisa. You likely know them, and if you don't, you will in a little bit. This was, as we were thinking about this series, one of the things that we discussed was having practitioners speak about their experience of working within what we call the justice system in this country to help us go from some of the theoretical things that we've been talking about back to, well, what does this look like? How is this experienced for those who are a part of it? And in particular, some of their experiences on I don't know how we'd say it, but both sides of the aisle, so to speak, the gavel, the experiences of those who've been in the process. There's no gavel. Okay, good to know. And those who are, practitioners. So I'm really excited to have you two here. This is just a conversation, and we're gonna make some space at the end for you to share some of your questions. So if you hear some things, you might just jot it down, things that you'd like to go deeper with. But to get us really started, I want to just invite you both to sort of share a little bit about yourselves, perhaps how long, so let's do some of the church things, how long you've been at Epiphany, what that's looked like. But in particular, then just turning towards, how did you become involved in this line of work, in this career? What drew you to it? Is there a story there, or an experience that you remember that is sort of seminal in you leading this way? So we're going to start with Peter, because I think Lisa wants a little more time to just think about it. So maybe just introduce yourselves. I should say, and I think I'm going to get this correctly, Peter is a trial attorney. He works as in the public defender's office, most recently in Malden. And Lisa is a district court judge recently appointed by the governor.
Yes.
Within the past year?
September 9th, I
September,
got
this fall.
sworn in.
So thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Peter. Just share a little bit.
So, hello everyone. My name is Peter, and as you know, as some of you may know, I'm married to Janelle, and so we've been here for about three to 4 years now, and I currently practice as a public defender, and what that means is I get appointed to clients who are facing criminal charges and who cannot afford an attorney. And so I work for the state agency that appoints attorneys to indigent indigent defendants. What got me involved in this work is multiple streams. For a while, I was leading conflict resolution and nonviolence workshops in school settings and in colleges, and particularly when I was in Atlanta, prison was always at the periphery of the conversations that we were having, and I began to see how much prisons are a vector of violence that impact individuals and communities, and then so that encouraged me to get more involved in teaching inside prisons and jails when I was pursuing my MDiv with Janelle. And at Candler School of Theology, they had an opportunity to teach college-level classes to a maximum security prison for women. And during that time, I was able to teach 2 or 3 classes. And one of the classes that was most meaningful for me was teaching an art class. And at that art class, it was about 4 hours long, and we were just talking about art, practicing art alongside women who were incarcerated, and just hearing their stories about how they got involved in the criminal legal system very much prompted inside me of how I could be involved, in what ways that I could challenge the system. And yeah, that I did not really pursue work after that. For my MDiv, that encouraged me then to go to law school and figure out different ways that I could practice law and be what I am now, defending people who are facing criminal charges.
Thanks, Peter. Rich, if we could just turn down the gain a little bit on Peter's microphone. We're getting a little feedback. Lisa.
Okay.
Maybe share a little bit about yourself.
Gladly. First, I said I would give a little disclaimer, because even though I talk in public settings, is this me?
I don't know. Let's take it.
Okay.
Connection.
All right, now I got it off my ear, though. So, okay. All right. So I was going to say that even though I talk in a public setting in front of a big group of people, of strangers, every day, I think that speaking in front of people who I know and recognize may be a little bit more intimidating. So give me a little bit of grace, and that's my get it out there. So I graduated from law school in 2023. Always have been in Massachusetts.
What year did you graduate?
Oh no, 2003. 2003. This is the brain fog.
Yeah, no,
50.
it's fine.
I graduated from law school in 2003, but I came to Winchester with my husband David, who's in the orange sweater, it'll be 13 years ago, I think, in April. And so that's how I measure my time at Epiphany, when we moved to Winchester and when my son was born, and I can remember coming to Christmas Mass with him as a tiny little baby. So I've been here about that long. And I've been mostly drawn, I think, to Epiphany because of the community of people and the relationship that we have with each other. And I think that theme of relationship is what has brought me to the place that I am now as a district court judge. I spent a couple years after law school in the appeals court clerking. Then I worked at a really large firm where I looked around and saw that people did not seem particularly happy, and I tried to picture myself, 5 or 10 years down the road, if that's what I wanted to be, and it wasn't. So then I joined the Essex County District Attorney's Office. So that's the other side of the system that Peter's working in now. The crime in Massachusetts is prosecuted by mostly the county district attorneys, and to some degree also then the Attorney General's office. But state crime is governed or sort of managed really by the district attorney's offices through the district courts and the superior courts. And so I worked for an elected district attorney in Essex County, and I stayed in that office for nearly 6 years until I had Sawyer, and then it just didn't seem like a manageable balance any longer. But while I was there, I thought it was the greatest job ever. I liked it. I liked the pace of it. I liked the collegiality with my other prosecutors, but I think as time wore on, I got to see that it was kind of one-dimensional, and there were a lot of constraints put on line prosecutors by sort of accountability and reporting up to your elected official, and you were always worried about me. Not so much. I was more of a ask for forgiveness kind of prosecutor than permission, and that got me sometimes into a little bit of trouble, but But that's the way those systems operate. Essentially, with very young prosecutors who are fresh out of law school, who are working on large caseloads like attorneys at CPCS. And so I spent 6 or 7 years there. Then I went into private practice, did a lot of the kind of work that Peter does now. I worked both at an appellate level, so I was on a private panel through Committee for Public Counsel Services to handle criminal appeals, and then I was also a bar advocate. So in Massachusetts, criminal defense is either by private attorneys or attorneys who represent indigent attorneys and are indigent clients and are employees of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, or are private attorneys who are contracted through the Committee for Public Counsel Services to take cases in the district and superior courts. So that's what I did for a number of years until September, when I closed my practice and came to the bench. And I really did that, and that was a process of 2 years or so where I had a lot of support from the community here. It's a long application, but I decided that I thought I could have a voice for more people from the bench and try to set kind of a culture in the community courts, because that's what those district courts are. If you've never been into one, that's where most people interact with the judicial system in Massachusetts. And so that's why I wanted to be a part of it and take a leadership, I think, position there.
I wonder if, Peter, you sort of said you were in getting your MDiv, your Master's of Divinity, and that process, sometime during then sort of led you to, I want to explore the law a bit more. Was there something, is there, maybe seminary was that bad, but just wondering about that experience. You talked about the artwork and coming alongside others, but anything in particular that sort of really moved you to go towards the law?
There maybe wasn't one moment. It was more of just a layering of experiences that kind of drew me towards defending people who are facing criminal charges. A lot of it had to do with seeing the professor that brought us into teaching the course, the impact that she had on the women who incarcerated their lives there. Things spoke to me about the value of being present with people and making sure that that I am accompanying a person, that I'm extending a sense of humanity, because part of a lot of the process is very dehumanizing, especially once a person is arrested, they're put in handcuffs, they're brought to a police station, they're fingerprinted, they're routinely told and forced to comport their body in different ways. And then they might spend the night in jail, and then after that, they're brought to the courthouse to be told what their charges are. And all of that is it's a very beginning of a process that strips a person's agency and forces them to do things that they don't want to do. And there's a lot of very unkind people throughout that whole entire process. And what I saw in the prison was a process that was just a continuation of that, was to say that there are very, very few people within the criminal legal system that extends humanity, that kind of reflects a kindness. And I saw how that professor kind of extended that kindness, extended that humanity. And that was something that I wanted to do, something that I wanted to get involved with, and I just didn't necessarily know what were the practical steps. And so a law degree seemed to be the best way for me to pursue that vocation of trying to be a humanizing presence in a very dehumanizing system. And I see that very much intertwined within my own Christian vocation of what it means to kind of live out my call to pursue Christ. A lot of things that Jimmy was saying last week of, the majority of the New Testament was written by people who were in prison. Paul was routinely incarcerated. And Jesus himself was incarcerated. And so part of drawing to an incarcerated person is, for me, is also drawing near to Christ, and participating in kind of that gospel narrative of being, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that we, you're doing great.
Okay.
One of the things that we have been talking about really since the fall is, and kind of led us into this series, is around justice. And so I wonder if you might just reflect with us and share a little bit about, what is justice for you? What did you maybe understand justice to be when you first went to law school and then began to practice versus maybe where you are now? Like, has anything changed in that way about your understanding of what justice is because of your work?
Well, so what I'll say is, I don't think when you're in, I think you may be an exception. A lot of people go to law school because they don't know what else they're going to do. Or you see it as just an opportunity to get a pretty broad education before you sort of jump into some specific field, because it doesn't, it doesn't limit you at all, right? And there are plenty of my friends who I went to law school with who aren't practicing law any longer. And I'm one of my only law school classmates, like my sort of cohort of friends, who is what most people, who took a path that looks like being a lawyer, being in a courtroom every day, being with people, being in community. And so it doesn't necessarily, I didn't go there knowing that I would land here, but I think I landed here because of who I am. I forget what your question was.
Well, just a core sense of justice. That may
Right,
not
so the
be
core
actually
sen-
the
so the core-
guiding.
the- So as a prosecutor,
Yeah.
right, I think the idea, right, I wrote this, I made some copy and paste, because the ABA standards, so the American Bar Association, says that the prosecutor is to seek justice within the bounds of the law, not merely to convict, serves the public interest, and should act with integrity and balanced judgment to increase public safety, not by both pursuing appropriate criminal charges of appropriate severity and by exercising discretion to not pursue criminal charges in appropriate circumstances. And then there's this famous case of Berger v. United States, 295 U.S. It's from 1935. The United States attorney is the representative not of an ordinary party to a controversy, but of a sovereignty whose obligation to govern impartially is as compelling as its obligation to govern at all, and whose interest, therefore, in criminal prosecution is not that it shall win a case, but that justice shall be done. And so these are pretty lofty principles, right? But I think that most prosecutors, me included at the time, was a kind of win-loss mentality. And it's an adversarial system, and you own the information, and you give out what information you want according to the rules of criminal procedure, right? I felt like I was much more of an open book person. I would turn over my file, and that was my fairness, right? But I had a role to play. Someone else had a role to play, but it was very much like the attorneys in the courtroom. And my sense of justice now has broadened to include the actual people who are involved in the controversy. So I want to tie eventually back into what Dr. McCarty said last week about our system and sort of this idea of the sovereign or the state or the Commonwealth as being the ownership of the controversy, where really it's the people who are either doing the harm or experiencing the harm. And that's where justice needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's just go there, because I think just listening to both of your stories, it is that relationship, it is that getting close, it is that humanity that seems to be motivating, not necessarily a sense of abstract idea of what justice is. I think it's, for those who weren't with us last Sunday, Dr. Jimmy McCarty from Boston University talked with us about restorative justice, the biblical understanding of justice, and there were two things that I just noted, and I shared with both Peter and Lisa before this week that I really wanted to reflect with them on. And one of the things that he said, as Lisa just mentioned, is that we have outsourced our conflicts and seeking of justice to professionals, not seeking justice as a true community of people in relationship. That was one thing he said that I was excited to talk with professionals a little bit about this week. And secondly, he said, our culture seems to equate justice with suffering. And the idea is that, people need to suffer in order to achieve justice. Generally, those are two sort of pillars of what we call the justice system. So I just wonder, share some of your thoughts about perhaps what Jimmy said, and then maybe just going deeper about what it's like to work within a structure that has many pillars, but certainly those two are part of it. So any reflections about what you heard last week and maybe what it's like for you personally to be involved in it?
Yeah, so what this brings up in me is thinking about the first year of criminal law class, and it gets to a little bit things that you're thinking about, talking about, Lisa. In criminal law, you kind of learn this formula, like mens rea plus active reus equals guilty, meaning that there's like a thought, an action, and if there's those two things present in most crimes, then a person can be kind of deemed guilty. It felt very like formulaic, and a lot of these textbook examples are often very like horrific crimes. Typically, they're examples of like homicide or something that rarely happens at the day-to-day level. Most of the things that people are charged with are like shoplifting, larceny.
In the district court.
In the district court, yeah. In the district court. Like most of the things that attorneys will handle right after they come out of law school will be very minor things, very everyday crimes that aren't these kind of very high-level stuff. There are, sometimes if a criminal defendant, if someone goes to like rural area, they might be thrown a homicide case in the first 6 months, which is another problem. But the way we talk about these crimes in the criminal legal crimes in law school, I think creates this mentality that there is a certain type of person who are committing these things and they need to be locked up. The solution is to lock someone up and for them not to be part of a community. But in reality, I think as Jimmy pointed out, there's a lot of different kind of other solutions, different kind of imaginations that can be explored, but you have professionals who are making these decisions and taking the agency out of communities to not solve their problems. And while I was in law school, I was very frustrated about what was happening, about how my professors were talking about criminal defendants primarily because of the classes I taught at the prison. I knew people who committed murders. I knew people who did very extensive, horrible crimes, but they were still very human to me. They were multidimensional. And that prompted me to go teach a course, a legal research, a mindfulness course at Nashua Street Jail, because I really wanted to understand what the experiences were like for people who were currently going through the criminal process. And from those initial conversations of mindfulness, I was beginning to get a sense of the different classes that the students wanted. And one of the classes, they wanted legal research tools. They wanted to better understand what was going on in their cases. They wanted to know how to navigate their tablets, because when you're incarcerated, you have access to a legal library, and now most of their libraries are online, on an online platform. But if you don't know how to navigate a search engine, you do not have the ability to kind of actually access the legal text. And giving that access, teaching the tools to kind of read a text and beginning to decode very kind of dense cases, I think is something that kind kind of opens an opportunity for people to better understand what's happening in their lives. Because a lot of the times our laws are very coded and prevents people from actually understanding what's happening. We don't really create those opportunities for people to build the capacity to defend themselves or to understand what's happening so that they can have a conversation, so they can advocate for the tools that will create more liberation or more ability to have a say in their case. Because a lot of times attorneys can kind of steamroll through clients, which continues to kind of rob that agency or prevents kind of them from actually understanding how they can begin to partake or the different resources that they can pool to further defend themselves. I don't know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lisa, wondering your thoughts, what you heard from Jimmy last week and what stood out to you.
So before I was nominated to become a judge, I enrolled in a year-long, and I'm in the middle, well, I guess the last third of it, of a year-long restorative justice certificate program through Suffolk University. And so one of the first things that we read was this article that he referenced of conflicts as property, which is from 1977. So it's not like some new woke kind of idea, right? It's pretty fundamental, and yet we're still in that same system. So this is one of the things that I had. In a modern criminal trial, two important things have happened. Modern 1977, a year after I was born. First, the parties are being represented. Secondly, the one party that is represented by the state, namely the victim, is so thoroughly represented that he or she, for the most part of the proceeding, is pushed completely out of the arena, reduced to the triggerer off of the whole thing. She is sort of a double loser, first vis-a-vis the offender, but secondly and often in a more crippling manner by being denied rights to full participation in what might have been one of the most important encounters in their life. And the victim has lost the case to the state. And it also discusses this idea that by removing these conflicts from communities, you're really reducing the capacity of the community to heal the harm in the first place, and telling people that they don't have the skill set or the knowledge or the sort of inherent desire for relationship to solve these problems. So I was excited to hear him say that and bring me back to this article, because I think it's important. And I think, when I first read it, I was like, oh, well, I'm becoming a judge. I'm a professional. And this is saying, like, we don't want to professionalize dispute resolution, conflict resolution. We want to increase capacity of people to do it themselves. And so I've been working with these people in my cohort. There are about 10 of us in this cohort who've been meeting every Friday online. And 3 of the men in my group are incarcerated for life sentences for murder at Norfolk State Prison. And I didn't know anything about their offenses until a few weeks into the program. And I can say that they did terrible things, violent crimes, and they yet have so much to contribute to our conversation, and have increased my understanding of the system so much that we value each other in that relationship. So it just brings you back to relationship. I don't think that what restorative justice is. It's not about like offender light and giving people an easy way out. It's really founded, so if you compare criminal justice, the two different views, this is from Howard Zare. Crime is a violation of the law and state. That's the criminal justice sort of view. Restorative justice, crime is a violation of people and relationships. And those violations create obligations to each other. True justice involves victims, offenders, and community members in an effort to repair the harm and to put things right. And so in Massachusetts, there is a statute that sort of an enabling statute for using restorative justice as an alternative to sort of traditional prosecution. It's part of the Criminal Justice Reform Act from 2018, still pretty in its early stages, right? And there are pilot programs in a couple of the district courts. But they're hard to get off the ground because it requires buy-in from elected officials who are charged with, protecting public safety. And you're carving out all these different kinds of crimes which are not eligible. But here I'm sitting with people who have committed murder, with mothers who have lost their children to murder, and who are in conversation and relationship with each other. So it's also not, I think Dr. McCarty said, it's not fixed in time to like the resolution of the crime and the offense, but it recognizes that harm persists like in ripples and waves far beyond the two parties and also into the future. So
it might be sort of the hardest to imagine, and it's in some ways maybe the exception to the rule to approach a restorative justice approach focused on relationships with these sorts of crimes, such as homicide. I wonder if we could start somewhere else thinking about restorative justice, the lower level crimes, maybe that newer attorneys are engaged with. Yeah, what would restorative justice look like for what is certainly the majority of the work that is coming before you? What would restorative justice look like in place of a criminal justice approach? I mean, help us understand. I'm not sure all of us know fully what even the process looks like and what happens to someone. We've seen movies, we've seen things, but what does it actually look like, and what could be a more restorative approach to engaging it?
Yeah. So let's say if there is a domestic dispute between a father or like a dog, like two family members, and the police get called and the police show up. And at least so I was practicing in New Hampshire, now I'm practicing in Massachusetts. And in New Hampshire, and I think it's similar here in Massachusetts, if there's probable cause, meaning that enough information for the police to arrest someone with a domestic dispute, they have to arrest that person. And once they have to arrest that person, they are handcuffed, brought to the police station, and the alleged victim does have any say in what's happening. Even if that alleged victim says like, oh, I don't want them to be arrested. I don't want them out of my house. I want them to stay here. I want them to kind of still be part of my home. No, they have to be arrested. They have to be taken back to the police station. And that very much kind of disrupts someone's life of what that could look like. It brings in the state actor who then can effectively kind of control the dynamics between those two people. Because when that person then who's arrested then gets arraigned by the judge that same day or the next day, there might be a condition where there's like a stay away, no contact order, where then that person then can no longer stay at their home, be in contact with that person. They effectively have to, I've had some clients who the alleged victim wants that person to return home, but the state will not allow that person to return home because of the stay away, no contact order. Then they're effectively homeless. I've had some clients that end up have to kind of like be living on the streets, or who've gotten seriously injured from sleeping on the streets because of the stay away, no contact order, even while their partner wanted them to return home. So what restorative justice could look like at that moment is not necessarily having that, having a conversation of what safety would look like, rather than it just be an immediate exile of that person.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that kind of
Yeah,
gets,
no,
yeah.
sure.
when I think also fundamentally, right, restorative justice requires the person who committed the harm to be able to take accountability.
Yep.
And fundamentally, in the criminal justice system, you have a constitutional right to remain silent, right? So there's not, even if there's a desire, everyone is siloed. So the defendant doesn't speak, the person who's harmed doesn't speak. And so I'm just in a more conceptual sense, like restorative justice in the appropriate kinds of crimes, which we're still working to figure out. But there's lots lower level property crimes or sort of neighbor disputes, a bicycle theft. There are lots of ways that we can start to dip our toes into it and to engage a community, to let people, to explain what the harm is to the broader community and let people have an opportunity to take accountability. Because the people that I've spoken with and spent time with in our sort of restorative justice circle, That wasn't part of their experience in the criminal justice system. And most of the people in that cohort don't see it as an alternative to the criminal justice system. I mean, it's not going to replace it.
Right.
It has to live in sort of parallel with it. And by working through and adopting restorative practices as the way that we live and work and walk with each other, maybe that starts to shift the system that we have in place. But, these young men who were committed to life sentences when they were 17 and 19 years old say that justice, because I asked them what was justice. Justice was equating harm with harm, meeting violence with violence.
Yep.
But they understand that that's not what it is now. And some of them are actually facing the possibility of parole and returning to community. And they need to be able to, return to a community where they're not seen as someone who's been, isolated for more than half their lives.
And if I may add, I think sometimes restorative justice could also look like, so sometimes restorative justice is depicted as like a circle, so everyone kind of
Right.
sitting down and talking about the issues. But restorative justice could look like just providing people with more opportunities. So maybe like if someone's charged with stealing something, maybe provide like a resource for them so they don't have to steal anymore, or provide something that is not just this kind of brutal punishment on their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dr. Jimmy last week mentioned also that, you almost said it, which is the Judeo-Christian tradition also has some responsibility in the understanding of what we know as justice today. You almost said it, which was sort of an eye for an eye, right? And he talked with us a little bit about that last week. And restorative justice wanting to put more the personhood, the humanity, the relationship at the center of things. I wonder what you imagine the role of your own faith in shaping your work and supporting your work, or challenging the work that's in front of you, how your faith has been sort of bred along the way of this journey for you, or helped you go deeper and question some of the other concepts of justice.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really appreciate about my job is that I'm able to have a sacred conversation with someone. They're able to kind of tell me what's going on in their lives without worries of that conversation being told. I'm not a mandatory reporter, so what someone says with me pretty much stays with me. And that means I could have very kind of rich conversations about what is going on, what's happening in their lives, and then not only like get it, understanding what's happening, but how I can advocate for them, learn from, like, hear their story, because when we go in front of the judge, the prosecutor will share a single story about them. We'll share a story about kind of their past conduct, but
Their worst day.
their worst day. Yeah,
Yep.
their worst day. But for me, I get an opportunity to share a better, not the whole person, and bring that into the courtroom. And that is the gospel message to a certain extent, is to not look at someone on their worst day, but to abide, to stand to stand beside someone and advocate for them, to accompany them along their journey. And that is how I see that I'm living out my Christian faith, is where I don't necessarily see where my job and my faith, those aren't two separate things. I see them kind of intimately intertwined, because who I understand who the Christ figure to be is someone who visited prisoners, someone who called for a compassionate justice, and trying to figure out how I can extend that to others as I go about my day. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, in fairness, you're much more a professional sort of religious person than I am. I mean, so when your question was, how does faith inform your work? And I was thinking, like, I don't know if faith informs my work or if work informs my faith, or like what is, chasing my tail. But I think what I thought about was how, when I was going through the process of becoming a judge and applying was like, how much do I reveal my faith? Like, is this, there was a real tension of like, do I out myself as someone of faith? Like, how will that be received? And I thought, like, well, that's a fundamental part of who I am and who I want to walk as. And so if I deny that, deny God's love for me, I mean, like, that's not, so that didn't happen. And I tried to bring that in. I don't know, where's Bob? Is Bob still here? I mean, Bob wrote me a letter of support, and Janelle attended my governor's council hearing. And then even after that, when I wrote an article for like for 3 Crowns, I got pushback from friends in the judiciary, like, oh, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want, I'm like it's some crazy limb that I'm going out on to talk about being in relationship with each other and treating each other as like, as all deserving of love and humanity. So that's how it's all come together. But I think I didn't realize, it seemed like a confrontation, and then it kind of turned into a marriage. But what I try to do on the bench each day is to recognize people by name and to greet people and to say good morning and to, acknowledge that they have a lot to tell me. But in this system, I have to let you speak through your lawyer, but just acknowledging people's humanity and anxiety and letting them speak, even when there's a lot of pressure to like keep it moving, keep things going.
So maybe just one more question, then we can open it up. And it's just the large open. What would you love for all of us or anyone to know about the criminal justice process, or your work, or what it's like? Just something that maybe we wouldn't know, we wouldn't even know to ask.
Well, so I would invite anybody that wants to visit a district court. Courtrooms are open. There are places where you can. There's a man in Salem that comes to court every day and watches. And he caught me in the elevator. He's like, "You do a really nice job in there." So I was like, "Okay." So you don't just have to get a jury summons. You can come and visit us in the district court and see what's happening. Because, one of my restorative justice classmates said this, and he said, "You can't get to a good place in a bad way, right? There's the person who commits the harm, but now things that are being done in the system is being done in all of our names." Right. So I think it's good to go take a peek and see if that's what you want to support, if that's what you think. And there are lots of, I'm going down my own rabbit holes trying to figure out ways that I can move the system to be more aligned with my values. And I'm sure there are ways that you can do that. Dr. McCarty talked about restorative justice training. You could do a restorative justice 101 through Suffolk. But I would say come and visit us in the district court. You'll see that beyond just the adversarial criminal cases, there are restraining orders. There are people who are dealing with children and loved ones who are suffering from substance use disorder and seeking help from the court there. There are mental health commitments. There are powers that I had that I hadn't even imagined about thinking substituted judgment and treatment orders for people who are involuntarily committed. So there are broad powers that work in the district court. So I'd invite you to come and learn about them. I guess that's what I would say.
Thank you.
Similarly, I invite you to just, understand what's happening and understand what the criminal legal process is like, because at different stages, there's different ways for you to get involved. So one way to get involved might be helping someone afford bail. There's a lot of people who are detained because they might not be able to pay their bail amount. And so there's a bail fund.
Mass bail fund.
There's ways that you could write letters to people who are incarcerated. I think that's a really great way to get involved, because some people might not have family members. And as Lisa said, prosecutors are representing the community, representing you, and they're doing things in your name. And you don't necessarily know what they're doing if you don't show up and participate and see what is happening. And so the more you see, the more you know. And if you have an opportunity to go inside a jail or prison, I highly recommend it, because I think we intentionally keep people out inside prisons and jails because we don't want to face the reality of what happens behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any opportunities, I'd be happy to kind of explore that as well with you. I figure out if there's a way to do a tour. That'd be pretty cool. And then there's Communities for Restorative Justice. Jimmy mentioned them last week. I've volunteered with them while I was in law school. And so if you want to get plugged in with them, I'd be happy to connect you.
Great, thank you. I'd love to just open it up. Questions. Do you have a microphone, or is this the microphone? That's the one. Okay. Any questions that you'd like to offer? Over here, Joel.
What is your
Just have to hold it close, I think, Joel.
Okay.
Very
And
close.
stand up.
view? Oh, and stand up.
Sorry, I can't see you.
What is your view on your work in the criminal justice? Okay. I worked for 14 years in corrections, and it was eye-opening when I first started there at what goes on in a prison. What is your view? I mean, do you see anything after the fact? And is that part of the process you're talking about? Because in my experience, having interaction with thousands of prisoners, there's a lack of respect for the prisoner, which they become institutionalized, and one day they're going to leave, and as one warden said to me, it's the age-old problem of the keeper and the kept. And, you know, they only run prisons because prisoners let them run prisons. So these prisoners are going to get out someday, and what's the thought process, you know, that goes on at the very beginning to help them? And is there one? Is it part of the thought process? Because most people will go to prison in this system. So, you know, I've been out of it for a while, but this whole notion of restorative justice, I'm not sure it's applying in the prison context. Yeah, I mean, there's people involved, as you said, but, you know, talking about it, but what's the bigger picture, if you have an understanding of that?
Well, I would say that the sort of down the road plan, this is what I'll say, actually in district court, most people aren't going to jail, aren't going to prison. And if the district court, the maximum sentence that a offense carries is 2.5 years in the House of Correction. And when that's all said and done, it's basically like 2/3 of that maximum sentence will wind up being served if it's even imposed. So you're relatively short sentences in the district court. And that's why I think the shift has to be, you know, away from, I feel like I'm saying things that, my views do not represent the views of like the Massachusetts trial court.
Thank you.
So that should be away from incarceration, because that institutionalization happens whether you're there for like 6 months, 18 months, or 25 years. Of course, it's a matter of degree, but it's not really being discussed. But I would say actually it is, you know, some Norfolk, where I'm going next week for a 2-day restorative justice retreat with these men. It is working there, and it is implemented, but it's not across all the different institutions, even within the sort of DOC system, which runs the state prisons or the county, you know, the county jails. And it may be because the turnover in county jails is so fast that they don't invest in those types of programs. But I will say, just from a law enforcement perspective, that in corrections, I mean, it's not just what you say about the offender is true, right, and the institutionalization, but I think it's also true for the corrections officers too. And the health impacts to corrections officers is real and quantified, and they suffer. So I think it's not a healthy place for anyone to be.
Peter, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll say briefly. I think there is the institutionalization process begins, I think, when someone's arrested, because then they're habituated to kind of obey. They're habituated to be confined. And then when my ethics professor once talked about how there's rituals of guilt that kind of cast people away and send people away, because you have a whole jury of 12 people or 6 people that say this person is guilty and they're sent to prison. But there's no rituals that welcome people back into community. There's just kind of this routine practice of sending people away, but not figuring out how we can actively integrate people back when they come back. Because I think the system is very much set up for people to stay inside and be kept inside. Because as you're saying, Joel, like if you're incarcerated for 18 years, that is your life. That's all you know, and that's just how you live.
Yeah. Thank you. I think there's another question. Yeah.
I'm curious about where you see the possibilities of grace and hope in the work that you do. So we often think of the law as fairly stark, rigid. You know, we have a law, and by this law he ought to die, very, very clear. But yet as a physician, I'm often called on to write documents on capacity. I can't speak to competency, but I can speak about capacity. And when I do that, I often see, at least on the probate side, a lot of generosity and openness and hope. But I'm curious if the same exists on the criminal side.
Can I give one example of sort of a grace moment? I represented a young man who was charged with motor vehicle homicide after he had first episode psychotic break. And he stole a vehicle, he drove all night long, he fell asleep at the wheel, he crashed into someone and killed that person. And he faced mandatory minimum penalties based on the different offenses. We engaged a mental health expert and dove deep into everything that was going on with him and negotiated an outcome that was acceptable to everyone that put him on probation. And the wife of the decedent came to the plea hearing and asked my client if she could hug him. And that was one of the first, as a defense attorney or a prosecutor, one of the first moments that I think that was like a moment of grace, right? And everybody was crying. And this judge who just recently retired said that that was the most remarkable thing he'd seen in the court system, like in his years. So there are these opportunities for grace, but it goes back to the relationship, that you can't do it when you're out of relationship.
Yeah, I just reflecting on what Jimmy was saying, that even, for example, when we professionalize it, if justice is to be delivered, even those who have been affected, the victims, so to speak, don't get to participate. It's either declared, it's a reality. And so, yes, this idea of grace is going to be something participative, right? It's going to be something that we have to help make happen, and those who are part of it have to participate. I don't know, it's just something that really struck me last week when he was talking about that. We've created a system where no one can really participate. Mm-hmm. And so we all lose our humanity to some extent through this. Okay, one last question, and then...
So speaking of the future after they come out of wherever they're incarcerated, right now, almost every time I filled out an application for a job, it always says, were you ever committed a crime or anything like that? And I always I go, phew, thank goodness that I don't have to say I did, because I wonder I would probably not get that job. So does that seem like that should even be allowed, that question? It seems, yeah, on job applications. It's not on job applications. It's illegal now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, answer.
Yeah, I know in Georgia they banned it, or I don't know if they banned it here.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
But, or may I say, though, it's also difficult. So even if they've banned the box, like even if on an application, they don't ask it anymore, a person who's been incarcerated for 18 or however many years, they have a gap in their resume, or they're kind of lacking skills. So even there's this kind of structural part that is fixed, there's certain things that can't be fixed, such as like a person not having that same vocational equipment. And so that's why it's great in prisons trying to figure out how you can implement skills or resources for people to actually get jobs. In Maine, I think now they're allowing incarcerated people to have like online jobs. So there's people who are incarcerated who are getting like $100,000 a year, or like a lot of money. Like that's a lot more money than
$1.19.
Most people who are incarcerated are getting like $1 an hour or something. And so something like that would be a great initiative. So when someone gets out, they're actually having some skills. Yeah. And so like some of those skills could be like coding, or some jobs that people could do remotely. Yeah. So.
Well, would you all just thank Thank me? No. Join me in thanking. You can thank me, but thank you, Peter and Lisa, for today. And they're here if you want to ask any questions or the like. So thank you. Join us next week with Peter once again.